Okay, now that we have that first layer down, I just wanted to show you another tool that you might want to use. Sometimes you want to protect an area of your paper that you want to keep completely white, purely white. And in middle school or elementary school, you might have used a white crayon to do that, and that's still a tool that people use, and that's called wax resist. But most professionals don't do that. Most use a tool called Frisket, okay? And so it's like a material that you paint on, and in this case it looks orange, but you use a paintbrush for that. So with this tool Frisket, it's a liquid, and you paint it directly on the areas that you want to keep white. And then what happens is it dries, and it kind of has like a plastic feel to it. And then when it dries, you can paint directly over that, and then you can take your finger once the paint is dry and just remove it by just rubbing it on the surface of the paper, and it'll come off, and it'll leave the surface perfectly white, and you won't feel any evidence of it being there at all. Okay, so that's a tool that you might want to try to use if you're trying to protect the negative space of the white space. So again, the Frisket is not something you have to use, but if you're looking at it, you're painting and saying, you know what, I think there's some areas that I want to keep white for now. They don't have to stay white the whole time, but I'm just thinking like these railings heading down my stairs are going to be really hard to paint around, so I chose to put that Frisket on it. I let it dry, then I can just freely paint over that. Later, when that paint is dry, I can go back and peel all those railings up and deal with those later. I've got some reflections that are on the top of a roof over here. I know I'm going to have bits and pieces of sky poking through the trees, so I figured I'd throw a couple remnants of Frisket there to account for that, in case I end up going a little too crazy and putting too much water down, and then I'll, kill all my white spots. I want to be aware of that. I've got a vehicle in the mid-ground here that I know I'm going to have some reflections on, so I throw those on there as well. Okay? But again, that's not a tool that you have to use, but it is something you might find handy. So although I should definitely be doing this outside for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to kind of continue a little bit in the studio. I have a photograph. It's not a color photograph, but like I said, I should be outside or using a color photograph for my phone, but I can't tape and do that at the same time on my device. In any case, every time you go back to your watercolors, you want to try to reactivate, maybe not all of them, but the ones that you plan on using. And I always like to do that from light to dark. That way I'm not contaminating my colors. I'm just washing my brush out in between each one. But you can wait to activate them if you don't think that you're going to be using a particular color. Now as I proceed, if you remember the last time, I started with a couple foundational watered down colors, and I'm going to keep on adding some more watered down colors, especially now that this is completely dry. I can go on top of and create more values and sophisticated layers on top of what I already have. And you also probably remember that we just used Frisket, which is this orange solution, which will later be able to be peeled off, but it's protecting some of the paper so that it stays white. So as I'm kind of going through this time lapse here, just keep in mind that I'm not showing you how I want you to do it in terms of style. I mean, I think your personal style is going to show through. I just want you to see maybe just my process to hopefully that inspires you or gives you some ideas. The main thing is that you're trying to capture a moment, you're trying to capture the essence of the scene. With watercolor, especially when you're just beginning, going for photorealism is not really going to happen. Okay, so you kind of got to let that perfectionism go for this, and instead just try to get the essence of the scene. Start with looser, watered down brush strokes, and then smaller brushes and less water as you layer on top of that to refine what it is that you're planning on doing. So I definitely have a long way to go still, but you can kind of see how I'm starting to not only address the atmospheric, really light watered down stuff, but I'm trying to map in my shadows and cut those in and really paint around light areas. So if I've got a highlight on the steps or on the concrete walkway, I want to try to like cut that in. So I've got some shadows on the edge of those, down shadows defining the edges of my steps, trying to get that stuff in. looking for where shadows are cast, you know, under the tree around this electrical box, trying to get that, not fill in areas, but trying to get the really extreme shadows that I might even damp down later with a little bit of water. Just trying to get that stuff in. A little bit of contrast in the branches. Okay, so I've got a lot more defining of shapes that I'm probably going to attack next with maybe some wet layers, but not too bad. I just call this all over painting. I mean, that's the style that you have to do to approach this, is you're not just painting the tree, then painting the steps, then painting the concrete. It will not look unified. Okay, so that unity is really the name of the game. You're trying to also, and it's kind of too late at this point if you've already started, but you know, this was no chance that I set my artwork up this way. I tried to lead the viewer into the artwork with the staircase. Okay, so if you're at the stage where you're still planning it, think about the visual path that the viewer will take throughout your artwork to keep their eye moving throughout the page. You know, I'm leading your eye in with the steps and the railing. I'm continuing it with the zigzag of the sidewalk, and then kind of into the background and midground and up the tree branches to the sky. So I've kind of given you a full path throughout the artwork to continue looking at it, instead of just one object, another object, another object. You want to try to almost imagine what is the viewer going to look at first, second, third, fourth, and try to think of a way to keep the viewer's eye within the picture. So even if your scene is not super interesting, you can take some artistic liberties to make sure that you do have points of interest.